right, the meeting's been called to order. Rusty will not be here today. He's suffering down in Bermuda. The first thing, I'd like to follow the agenda fairly quickly, and I'd like to have this go an hour and 15 minutes if we can, so we're going to get on the train. Looking at the minutes, are there any corrections, additions anybody's had? I'm going to try and get some stuff out of the way at the beginning of each meeting so we don't have it hanging around to the end.
Motion to move.
Making a motion to move. Second?
Second.
All in favor? They've been adopted. Okay. Really in response to what Randy had asked last time about sort of a timeline chart, I got from Mr. Schreiner, who's been very busy with all his documents from the prior project, this timeline schedule. I think we have copies here available, which is a rough timeline of the, and various aspects, phases of the project. According to this, with a relatively tight construction schedule of 18 months, we'd be hopeful to have the school opened by August of 2022. I know Mike has been looking at this and has some ideas about how this might be shortened, but this is sort of the big picture. It has the various categories in it that we have to address. Russ, you put this together on the basis that we would go to the RTM before we had construction, subcontractor bids and everything in line. I don't know if that's what we have to do. It's a question of timing and everything else. But that's to be determined.
Keep in mind that the RTM is the appropriating authority, and their job is to cough up the money to make this work.
Right.
And so they kind of need, if we go to them, it's fine to inform them, but ultimately we've got to say, this is what we want to spend the money on. These are the bids that we've selected, and you guys need to appropriate that money. So,
but the point is that if you came to them with the bids done, that's a different stage of the appropriation than it did for the middle school or the high school. So the question is, how do we have to find that out, which way we're going to go here.
right, I think keeping them informed is good. What I wouldn't want to do, and this is kind of consistent with what we did for the Public Works Garage, is go to them with numbers and then come back to them with different numbers. So that's bad. I think anything we can do to keep them informed, in the loop, part of the process, all of that. But ultimately, what we want to do is come in and get the bids as best we see them so that we have a complete project that's not underscoped, and then go to them with a number. Anyway, but we'll work that out.
Yeah, it'll be later in the process than earlier, which is fine. So this is the general timeline, and we're going to be refining that as we go along. And then under that, the light blue at the beginning is our program finalization, architect selection, and initial approval for the money to get paid. The next two pages that we've printed out here are Rusty put together a kind of a grant chart of things to do to get that blue phase done. And I've asked Mike to at least to address this from his perspective.
Okay, so the way I look at this going would be that probably the first job of this committee is to select an architect. And that architect would then take the education specifications and have those community meetings with the various members of the school district and the town and the Oxbridge teachers and families, and come up with a real program scope, schematic design, see how that fits into zoning, and while that's going on, this committee would be looking for a construction manager and going through the process of deciding how you want that construction manager to work. Do you want him to be just a owner's rep? Do you want him to be construction manager at risk? Do you want him to be construction manager as constructor? There's multiple ways to do it. Construction manager as constructor would probably be the quickest way to get a guaranteed maximum price. it's a way a lot of school districts are starting to move their projects, rather than having a CM who would help facilitate the bidding process. The CM as constructor, he is your GC. And there's multiple firms that, large firms that do that. O&G, Turner, Charlotte, they all do that sort of work also. And I think you could take a couple of months off the process, because you would get the CM on board while the architect is going from schematic and everybody's saying, yeah, this is what we want, and when he starts designing for constructability, the builder is there working with him. And that's when you can come up with your guaranteed maximum price, and then be able to go to the Board of Finance and the RTM for the funding. So I think that'd be the quickest way to do it.
Okay. I skipped over one thing in the agenda which is relevant now, which is like we talked about committee assignments, and I've talked to each of you. Obviously, the idea would be that each person takes an area of responsibility and heads that up. For example, in searching for the architect, we'll have one person do that, although the committee will be involved in the interview process and all that. So that when the architect calls up somebody to find out how they're doing, they get referred to one person and not trying to pick us off and figure out how they can get in the back door or whatever. So I've talked to everybody about this. So far, what's very firm is that I've asked Diane to basically take the job of the architect on. And I've asked Rusty to take the job of the construction manager, contractor on. We have a permitting process, and I've talked with Randy and Mike and Duke. We have a lot of other things as well. So I'll be back. We'll finalize those by the next meeting. I'm hoping to ask John to be the man with the special
numbers.
The special numbers, I know. I'm sorry, I skipped out of that. I skipped over that at the beginning of our meeting. So as you can see, the process is lengthy. There's lots to be done, and one of the things we want to do is get started. And I'm going to ask Diane to start with the architect search. And we've got some forms here from the other projects, both questionnaires for architects, search out the ones who have been state approved, and get on that process right away, okay?
Can I just ask how you seek architects? What procedures you use?
Well, we're going to put together an RFP, but to find out who they are, we're going to go back to the state again, find out who's been there a lot.
I have that draft if you want.
Do you have that already?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
If you wanted me to hand it out.
Sure.
I put together a draft RFP for an architect, and I also went to the state and was able to go on their website. You could see who had projects up there, and then you could go to that firm's website and see what they do. Like, is this their only school building ever, or is this their... So there's two lists. So the first page is architectural firms, and the second page is construction management firms. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of the 7 the town has used previously. So here's those. And then I made up an RFP for architectural and engineering services. It's a draft. I'm sure there's going to be things the committee wants to add on. There is a section, I think, by page 6 where RFP timeline, that's blank. We have to figure out what that's going to be. That's going this way.
I have to say, on construction managers, AP Construction is the public works garage.
Yeah, they did a very good job.
Those guys are unbelievable.
I think that the middle school was AP, O&G.
You're right, they worked together.
Work together. Okay.
KG&D is the one that did the master plan for all the buildings, and KG&D is who we worked with on the cafeteria. And we went between KG&D and Petrocelli on architects for the cafeteria and chose KG&D.
Okay.
Can I say, I worked with Fuller and D'Angelo on
Okay.
Staples High School, the new Staples High School. I thought they were fabulous.
Yeah, they do a lot of work in Danbury, too.
And I worked with Silver Petrocelli, but only in terms of analysis of condition of schools with a long-term maintenance plan. Both very reliable companies. With KG&D, my only experience with them is I think they're overpriced. That's it.
Good to know.
Mike, who did Tokenique, do you know offhand?
Tokenique was Taisu Kim and Randall Luther, and he also did the analysis for McBroom. They did an analysis of school populations a couple of years ago when Dr. Pearson was the superintendent.
The enrollment.
Yeah, the enrollment thing,
Okay.
Malone and McBroom. Yeah, he did that. And JCJ, they did the middle school. And they just finished New Canaan, Sachs Middle School.
Well, do we think we have to have a larger list of architects, or is this big enough for us, big enough population?
Well, the
So
other,
the way to work it, we would likely send an RFP out to each of those firms.
Right.
But we're also obligated to
Post it?
post it in the
Advertise.
newspaper, and we post all of our RFPs on the web as well, so I think you'll get a pretty broad,
Okay.
Response to it.
So we can definitely send it to these people?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
yeah, Castle Booze and Perkins Eastman do a tremendous amount of work. Castle Booze mostly central and northwestern Connecticut, but they do a lot of Connecticut school projects that get a lot of their funding from the grant process. So they're very familiar with that. And Perkins Eastman, they're an international architectural firm. They have an office in Stamford and another one in Hartford.
If I could interject here too, I would recommend looking for references for architects who design schools that are now a bit aged, maybe 10 years old or more, so that we can see the longevity of a school project. Because I would think longevity is an important consideration as you're designing the school.
We can put that into the RFP that, typically you'll ask for references and examples of their work, so we can make that a requirement in the RFP that it shows examples of their work in the last 5 years, work from 5 to 10 years out.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Jamie raises a good point, having a firm that's good at architectural design that's
Yeah,
enduring.
enduring design.
Right.
Good language.
Anything local, we should probably think of a couple of people touring those facilities too.
You might, we can talk about it, you might want to, you mean look at ones that the architects
Sure.
contact.
From a
Yeah, we don't
reference
really need them to go to the school itself.
No, us going to some of those schools once we
Yeah.
find
Narrow
some.
down the
Yes.
list, yeah.
All right, so Diane, you got a lot to do to get us going here.
Okay.
Kate prepared sort of an outline, not sort of, but an outline. I have, let me just pass this out, of going to the RTM to get funds to get the initial project funded.
And this is assuming that we're not going to do the RFP first and then go out to go to the funds. This was trying to get us to the earliest point where you can get funds.
We would not do the architect RFP first?
I think if you want to do an architect RFP first, I don't think you're getting the money in April. I think it'd be kind of hard.
Is there any reason we couldn't put that out for scaffold and just put this one?
There is absolutely no reason that we could do that, yes.
Well,
If you have sufficient funds, yes, we could do that.
How much are we looking at to do that?
Well, I just don't know how we go about figuring how much money we need for the first stage until we
My thought would be to take some of the architects on the list and give them all a call and say, give me a ballpark.
But do we know what we're building yet?
We're building a school.
Yeah, I know, but can we use the conceptual design of KG&G to at least have them give us a rough idea of what it might be for their
I think so.
involvement?
Well, I mean, so the question would be is what do we need money for up front versus what we need to go to the RTM later for? So if you think about the expenditures that are sort of prior to spending money on the building, what do we need to spend money on now?
Reduction of documents. While it's dated, was there anything drafted for Tokenique when you built Tokenique?
That I don't know.
Well, we could go back and certainly look and see what it cost us to get the architect and, this beginning with the architect.
It's like the high school, we allocated, I think, $80,000.
Yeah, but see,
I think we're talking about a couple $100,000.
No, absolutely,
So-
what I'm
Right,
saying.
so there's 800,000 or so in the Board of Finance capital contingency. I don't ever want to shortchange or short-circuit the RTM process on this, but in the spirit of kind of keeping this moving forward, I would hate to wait a month while we're trying to get money just to grease the rails to
Yeah.
get this initial work done. So, I mean, obviously it needs to go to the entire board, but I'd be supportive of bringing that forward, and maybe what we could do is copy kind of the procedure that we followed for Tokenique, think about the money that's required to get this started, and we can fund it that way. I mean, I consult with the RTM and Jack and everybody.
Yeah, I think, yeah, if we do that-
There's no reason to wait on bureaucracy.
Yeah, if we do that, all we want to do is make sure that the RTM is aware that we're doing this, why we're doing it, that it's not being done to circumvent them in any way.
Totally right, we absolutely don't want to do this, but I don't want to lose a month while we're waiting for some money to just
What are
start
the
the
major
process.
categories of costs that would amount to a couple $100,000 just to get to an RFP?
Well, I looked into that because Fairfield seemed to be using that model, and they're doing a new school, and they're doing some major, renovate as new and put additions on. And what they were doing was they were bringing the architect to get the drawings up to where they could start getting estimated cost of what the project would cost. And so there was architect, there was a traffic study, the geotechnical, core bore sampling, going through the zoning process to make sure what they were building was going to fit in the site. So they had,
But those are all things that are, you embark on after you've selected an architect?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was thinking of this as between this moment and the day you pick we're actually getting to sort of sending out the packets to this list.
There's really no cost.
There's no cost, okay,
No,
that's fine.
there's really
Got it,
no-
we're talking about appropriations for after you pick one, got it.
To do all the conceptual drawings.
Got it.
And
and that number was a couple $100,000.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
And then the actual architectural fee seemed to range between 4.2 and 5.6% of the cost of the project, depending on, it really depended on what their role was in the construction administration process. A larger role, a larger cost. If they did some of the geotechnical engineering, if you had the special testing, like for the steel and the concrete and things like that, in the architect's proposal, that's his fee. Otherwise, that's a soft cost as a separate fee that would show up later. And that's pretty much the number, it's like they rate construction from like 1 to 5, depending on the complexity of the building. 1 would be like a warehouse or a garage. A 5 would be like a very high-end luxury home or a high-end office building. And schools generally fall as a 3. There's just, they're not overly complex usually, and they're not simple either.
Anyway, my point about money is that with this contingency, we can get money quickly. We should always say, let's go to the RTM, excuse me, and get an evaluation if timing permits. If timing does not permit and there's something urgent, we can take it to the Board of Finance right away.
And you just need to make sure you do the resolution so that we can repay.
Oh, yeah,
Out of funding.
absolutely. Yeah, good point, we would do that.
when we did the garage project, I think, I don't want to say it was about $250,000 was appropriated to do all the work up front. That included paying the architect all the way through construction drawings, which is the more expensive part of the process. And it also, we had some money in there for the bidding process that the construction manager did, and we had money in there, well, I think in the architect's fee was also the engineering and bore sampling and all the other testing they had to do. And I just, if that project was like a $5 million project, and we're looking at something that's substantially larger, do we have to appropriate, something substantially larger than our 250?
Well, there's no doubt that's entirely possible.
Start.
I'm just saying that we've got a contingency budget that if there is some immediate funding that the RTM appropriation calendar simply doesn't permit us to have on a timely basis, we've got some money to work
It's
with.
a short-term loan.
But
I got
but
that.
the rest of this stuff should be done through an appropriation.
Okay. So that we don't necessarily have to follow the schedule then, if we're going to use that approach. So we will launch full speed into the architect search. Okay. Jeremy, I got a chair for you right here.
Oh, beautiful.
Rusty decided that it was too important for you. So I asked Jeremy to speak a little bit about the overall planning process that we're going to be exposed to.
Sure. I put together a quick memo for all of you to take a look at, get us some talking points here. I think there's actually for Jane, Kate, and Mike over there. And this will kind of walk you through. I noticed from your timeline, you set aside a window in early 2020 for local permitting, which is great. Good to see that that's set aside. Nothing worse than having that trip you up along the way. So my understanding from Mike, we've had a couple informal conversations, is that you're likely to see a new school in, we'll call it the southern part of the property. Whereas now green space. Mike has told me you've ordered a survey, which is really the first step in figuring out what's out there now, topography, and you have an old survey from '93, which I've taken a look at to put together this preliminary memo.
We're going to order a survey.
Going to order a survey.
We don't have
it. So the first step really is identifying the on-site wetlands. Rich Jacobson from my office has gone out, says they're probably quite minimal all the way in the far back in an area that's probably not going to be disturbed as part of this project. So it's likely the project might not need to go to the Environmental Protection Commission. Similarly, hopefully because that area is fairly flat, you might not get into a building height issue like we did for the Darien High School where variance was needed. That made the project very complex and very contentious. So as long as the building meets the setbacks and building height, we're okay with not needing to go before the zoning board of appeals for a variance.
When you mentioned the flat area, you're talking about that southerly area.
Southerly area, gently sloping out,
Yeah, okay.
but it, because the high school was obviously much bigger and there were more grades and the high school's a taller building, building height
What's
issues.
the current height, about, what is it, 35 feet?
30 feet,
30 feet. Okay.
so it should be able to
Two-story
do.
backs.
Yep.
But here we have a school that I think Dr. Lane said you have to, by law, everything has to be on the first floor, correct?
We need kindergarten at first grade on the
I was
first
just kidding.
floor,
Okay, sorry.
but the other grades can be on the second floor.
Okay.
So really, at that point, if you can avoid review and action by those other local land use boards, the first step is a mandatory referral under section 8-24 of the state statutes, which require that the Planning and Zoning Commission issue a report on what is going to be a substantial improvement to town property. They have to weigh in on whether that substantial improvement is consistent with the town plan of conservation and development. Clearly, putting a school back on the school property is consistent. I can't foresee how someone would say that's not consistent. The school's been there a very long time. So that is a very quick turnaround. No public hearing is needed for such a referral. So that would likely come first either in December or January.
Excuse me, Jeremy, just a question on that. What will this committee need to provide to the Planning and Zoning Commission
Good question.
for that mandatory referral request?
It could be something as simple as an architectural sketch. At that point, we don't need final plans. It's just kind of a concept of, generally, here's where we're going to put the school, here's where we're going to put the parking. We don't need to know the details of how many parking spaces or the final grades or anything. You can give a very preliminary box on a sheet of paper. So that's why that can come early, because in the background, your architect will be working on fine-tuning various things. But that's just the concept of the substantial improvement. So you don't have to be very far along in that.
Does that, Jeremy, does that align in the, I did some reading, there's some state guidelines as to the amount of acreage for an elementary school, amount of acreage for middle school, for high school, and then there's per student guidelines too, in the state's construction.
I think this would be separate from that, because those are, I'll call it school standards set by the, probably the State Board of Education.
Mhm.
So this would be irrelevant of that. The
Okay.
commission's just going to look at it from a land use standpoint, not necessarily from a 18 to 22 students per classroom. Do there need to be boys and girls laboratories or anything like that? That's why you just need to show the box
Okay.
and not any of the details.
Can you tell us today that the ed specs, all the ed specs meet those standards that you were
Yes.
just describing?
So really, the first step after the referral report would be the architecture review board. They look at the exterior design of the school. Again, they don't worry about what's in the box, if you will. They're just going to look at the exterior, what it looks like. Whether you, I know, Tokenique, stucco, most schools are brick. Whatever the group put together. Again, we don't need to see finished drawings, but their focus is solely on the exterior of the building. As I know here, that probably would be a two-meeting situation with the architecture review board. Again, not a public hearing, because they just, it's a very informal board.
Is there any
board-
guidance? I'm sorry.
And that board meets on a monthly basis?
They meet monthly, can meet more frequently as needed. If you're finding that you need them to meet especially for your schedule, they'd be willing to do that.
It's probably smart to get their input on the RFP package in a sense, because you don't want to go have design firms come back with things that we know they're probably going to object to. Do they have like kind of typical preferences?
You know, it's interesting, that came up a lot during Tokenique, because Tokenique is a different exterior design than the other schools in the area. Middlesex School, or you think of home school, classic brick, they look like schools. Darien High School looks a little different. And it really is up to the architect and your committee to bring a design to the architecture review board. Certainly, there will be some members that like the classic look, brick, sloped roofs, flat roofs don't usually get a good response because they're more maintenance. However, you can do more with green roofs than you used to, and the fact that if you're bumping up against building height, there may be areas where a flat roof is the only way to make it fit. Although, yes.
I presume that the architect needs to be present for both P and Z and for
I would say the architect, very much so for the architecture review board, maybe less so for planning and zoning. Planning and zoning, you might need, definitely, obviously someone from this committee, but planning and zoning, that's a nice segue to what they're going to be looking at. They're going to be looking at the site plan, the layout, the driveway, the parking, and what the possible need for a filling and regrading permit. The filling and regrading regulations in Darien are very strict. They limit greatly what you could do as a right without getting a special permit from planning and zoning. The good news is schools are allowed as a right in this zone. So the question will not be whether a school is allowed. The question will be whether the amount of regrading will be impacting anyone and whether your engineered drainage system can accommodate any water runoff. One of the issues, of course, will be for water runoff during construction, and if you're doing a separate school while the school's still in session, at one point you'll basically have two schools on that property. And how do we address drainage during that point too? Because presumably what you're going to do is take the old school when it gets demolished and turn it into parking lot or green space or something else. So So that might be a trick there, is figuring out how to design that.
I presume also that any engineering studies that are done, or traffic studies, you'd want the author of those studies present as well.
Exactly, someone who could be present to answer questions.
So the costs of all of their appearances have to be built into our budget, I would think.
Yes.
Yes, in their contracts, they would be built into the contract.
Jeremy, are we going to need a traffic study since the school already exists there? It's not a new.
Right, as school is, as I said, permitted as of right. I think we would look at the traffic study more so as a guide for two things. One is during construction, a lot of trucks coming and going. And the second is, we have to figure out what to do with contractor parking. Because certainly, school only has enough for students, staff, not even students, staff. If you get 100 contractors out there every day, it's going to be.
I would also offer, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Landon, but one of the objectives of this project is to consolidate ELP.
Correct, that is right.
So there will be a change in the number of students coming to that building. So I would think a traffic study would be very important.
Right, to discuss, and again, the amount of parking you provide has to be related to what you're doing, and you're going to want to give yourself a little leeway. So that's something to have out there and have prepared.
In the original master plan that KG&E did for us, it had the ELP consolidation, it had a new bus route, it had new parking, it had specific drop-off for ELP. It had all that stuff built in, probably at a high level, but at least it's a foundation and a view to start with the architects too.
The consolidation wouldn't happen until the project was complete.
Right.
That's correct.
And I might want to add that not only kindergarten and first grade, but ELP needs to be on the first floor.
Right.
So we're going to have to figure out for contractor parking during construction, whether we arrange for shuttle or some on-site area or something, because there will be quite a few people coming on site every day. I did speak to the building official. His main concern will be having that construction area fenced off and separate from the building, obviously, for safety reasons. I did note in the memo other permits and reviews which are needed to throughout the process. Certainly as the details, the architect works out the details. We can have the department head sit in this room with the architect and talk about various aspects, both during construction, have things to look for as they put this plan together.
Is that an additional cost that we need to plan for, sort of securing the construction site, considering that there are going to be small children?
Oh, yeah.
That's all.
That's built in.
We went through that process with the high school, with the building of the cafeteria, the fact that we did the cafeteria building during graduation while school was in session. So most of the firm we work with was well aware of.
Yeah, because a lot of the playgrounds
There's
are
a process.
used, not, on weekends and after school.
But there's a process of every employee and every person that goes on that site goes through a background check. So that's built into all the contractual obligations.
Right, because there's two parts of it, right? So people coming on campus, then it's also, what we're exposing the kids to in terms of equipment and construction. So that's all part of standard.
Mike, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's come up a couple of times, and I don't know as part of the survey or Jeremy, if you know, there's been conversation about there's land there that is, I've heard it's town land, I heard it's not town land. I'm not sure if it's actually part of the school survey as we think through construction site and parking and overflow and stuff like that. I don't know if we just need to at least
It's not
keep-
part of the school property. It's town vacant land. And I guess the town has a map with different colors for
Right.
different things. That's a different color than the Oxford School. It's not part of the school.
The property directly to the south of the Oxford property is open space. So even when Dr. Brenner was here, he asked me about that piece of property, which is open space associated with the three properties which front on Middlesex Road. And that is their required open space for when they subdivided that property. So the town can't use that, the town doesn't own it. So that remains open space, not part of the school property and not able to be used by the town.
Good, true.
So I'm glad you brought up that question. The other thing we'll have to check, Mike, as we look at this and as I think more about it is, we talked about building height and building setbacks. The other thing we'll have to keep an eye on is building coverage. You can only cover 20% of the property, but as you build two big schools on one property, we'll have to make sure that we don't go over that 20%. So that will be a interesting.
How about is there a, is it allowable to breach that during construction? Because at one point you will have
two schools,
You'll have two
basically.
schools, right.
There'll be a point where basically you have two schools
Right.
for a few months, and then you'll start
to
to
be overbuilt before you deconstruct.
Correct.
Would that be permissible?
So that, to go over 20% coverage, you would need a variance.
You would, no matter what.
So we'll have to take, as the architect designs it, we'll have to make sure that, and there may be ways to avoid that.
Jeremy, does the parking count for the 20% or
The
not?
parking would not count, it would just be the buildings themselves, the roof areas of the buildings. So we'll have to make sure that we design that. There might be ways to avoid that.
Yep, I'm not sure, and we can always check in with Rusty pretty quick, but he might have a thought in here somewhere, but the whole demolition of the school, and the costs associated with demolition, potential abatement, and all that type of stuff. I think we should that's kind of the whole, after the school's built, we get everyone in there.
Have there been any studies done on the existing school to see what might be in there?
Yes.
Because that's one thing, after the high school experience, it's best if we can find that out up front.
I'm sorry, Kate, would you repeat that?
I was asking if we had any studies done on what is in the existing school. Because if you recall, the high school, one of the cost overruns was when they went to demo the old high school and found all the asbestos.
Well, that's part of what you have to do.
We need to have that all done up front. We don't want
Yeah.
that kind of surprise.
I think you want to look at the PCVs in the windows.
Right.
Yeah.
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 Well, we have the HERA reports, and one of the things was that you don't do destructive looking when they did the original reports. So unless you take guesstimates on what's in the walls, you wait till you come to demolition, and then it's like, holy crow, look what we got here. So we have, in this building, most of the piping was above the ceiling. The floors and the floor mastic has already been abated in the past 15, 20 years. The boiler rooms have been totally abated. The roof has been totally abated. So it's pretty much PCBs in the windows, and there is a small amount of heating and water piping that would be behind cement block walls. That has asbestos on it.
So I'd say what we probably need to do is when we're talking with the construction manager and preparing for bidding, outline all the unknowns.
Yeah,
So
yeah. You would
that-
get a company like Hygienics or ChemSpec to come in, and they can, from their experience, they can give you a really good idea of what you're going to have behind those
Yeah,
walls.
Yeah, so we don't want to surprise.
No.
And have to go.
No, you definitely don't.
Is that work that could be done, they can get in there during a school break if needed,
Oh, yeah.
sooner rather than later?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we could do testing while the building is up that won't really disturb,
Well, you're going to be doing more observation.
yeah.
You're going to look at something, and you're going to see thermal insulation on a water pipe from 1965. You don't have to test it.
You know.
That's right. And even if you can see that the fiberglass it's not asbestos, but it's fiberglass on the long runs, your elbows, the mudded joints, they're all going to have asbestos in them. That was the industry standard. So,
So we can make some pretty good assumptions before we go out to bid.
absolutely, yes. But you're right. You're definitely right. It's something you don't want to get caught.
Right.
Was there a problem with the actual brick in part of the Darien High School that needed to be abated, the blue brick? Do you recall
I
that?
don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I wasn't here when that was demolished, but I don't know.
Okay.
But, at the time that building was built, exterior mortar for holding brick sometimes had asbestos in it. Sometimes if it was a glazed brick,
Yep.
It had asbestos in it to give it some extra strength.
I think that was the case with the brick there, so just a note for this project, depending on the content of the brick.
And I think also with the issue about the PCBs, to the extent that they've leached into the concrete block, that's an issue as well. And we really don't, you can't test for that until you start taking it apart, can you?
Right, that is totally destructive testing.
Yeah.
But we can at least do that.
Right, you have it on the radar and get it.
Yeah.
So I think that covers most of the basics in terms of what you're looking at preparing for in late 2019 and permitting through February, March of 2020.
Doesn't sound as onerous as it could have been.
Well, it depends on the final design.
No, I understand.
So I think that's,
Depends on test boring, too.
yeah, again, what you find out in the field, with the
Yes.
survey, what can fit in the space you have there without having to demolish parts of the school while you're constructing a new one. So once we get a sense of survey, how big the new school needs to be, what the architect can fit. And
Jeremy, are there any things that they should keep in mind or try to avoid in the design, so to make it a smoother process, like make sure we don't go within X feet of sidelines?
right, and once we get the survey back, we'll be able to better delineate where the wetlands are, what the setbacks are in that area. And once any architect gets those ed specs, figures out how big the school needs to be, we can then start finding out if the school fits in that area. And then there's logistical problems during construction, as they said, of the parking. But I think my guess is where the school is now will end up being your green space and parking lot in the long term. So in 3-4 years from now, that's where the green space and parking lot will be, and the school will be now where the green space is.
Anything you can do to help us keep a running list of planning and zoning points that says, don't do these things because it will delay approval.
Right.
And we keep feeding that to the architect and everybody so that they come up with things that frankly are going to be easier to approve.
And that was one of the issues we had with the high school, is
Right.
as they got bigger and bigger, both horizontally and vertically, the architects said, I can't smush it down anymore, that's the way it's got to be.
Okay.
And that was, whether it was specific to that design or the needs of the ed specs or the architect, I don't know, but that really held up the school for quite a while and made it much more complex than it needed to be.
The other thing I would think is if you see things coming along in the plan that might upset neighbors.
Well, certainly, that would be helpful to have in the budget is obviously appropriate landscaping, because you're taking a school that's pretty much now in the middle of the property and putting it all in the southern part of the property. So there may be, again, you have to balance landscaping and security. And I leave it to you whether fences and types of fences might be appropriate versus different types of landscaping. That will be a design of your group and what the architect, security people, in terms of figuring out what might work, both to keep people out of the property and to help, fencing the playgrounds and things to make sure the kids are on the property.
Kip, I recommend that you consider, having someone on this committee be an official liaison to the neighbors for communication.
That's hard to figure that one out.
Or to get volunteers.
Being a neighbor.
Conversation. Now, you mentioned the survey's been called for. Do we have a date?
No, I don't, we talked about that we didn't, we have a survey from Redness Mead from 1993. The committee would have to authorize funding to upgrade that survey. My suggestion would be that you go back to the same company, and they can come out on site with the survey, and the survey we have does not have the 1996 edition on it, and there was some, the sewer ejector system was installed, and the parking lot was adjusted. So there are some things they would have to change on the map, plus they have to update the names of the neighbors on all the adjoining property, which is something that planning and zoning wants to see on a plan.
And speaking of the wetlands as well.
Since we need this, is there any reason we can't initiate this immediately?
Yeah, we need to do
Survey,
that.
yeah, I can call George and see what it would cost, and we can ask for a quick transfer.
It's George from Redding's meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we've got a meeting on Tuesday, so we can conceivably do it at that meeting. We get the right resolution to do the bonding that you suggest. Anyway, I just don't want to slow that
Yeah,
down.
the
Something
survey's
we
not
have
gonna be
in-
a big number.
Okay.
Yeah, check with,
But and we'll still do the resolution, but yeah.
Well,
I'll
can
do
this
the cost.
committee authorize that today, subject to what the number is?
Yeah. I don't think it's gonna be, I'm trying to think,
10,000?
yeah. and
10,000?
the one we just,
Probably under
the bid
10.
we just
I
got
would think under.
for short lane, or I think the pear tree was less than 10.
So
And
that's-
yeah,
In terms of,
and this is just updating.
this is updating, especially if Mike can point him in certain directions, but property's a little bigger than Pear Tree, but they already have some groundwork done on this, so maybe 10, let's all call it 10.
Well, what if we did this, what if we have a motion that says authorize the town to contract with Reddington Mead to update the survey, provided the cost comes in lower than $15,000?
Yeah, or authorize the work and then request to the Board of Finance to fund it not to exceed $10,000, which we can approve on Tuesday.
Give us 15.
All right, 15.
Okay, so the motion on the table is is to authorize the town to contract with Reddington Mead to update their survey proposal, and a cost to be determined, but no more than $15,000. That's the motion.
Well, and to request that the Board of Finance fund that.
I'm sorry, to request that the Board of Finance fund it. Second. All in favor?
Thank you.
Okay. Great.
Just a clarification on that. So who's leading that? Is the planning and zoning department?
No, it'd be Mike.
Mike. Okay.
Yeah, as soon
I
as
think
she
Mike and I
tells me
work
the money
together.
is there, she contacts George, he'll contact me and tell me when he's going to be out there, I'll meet him out there.
Excellent.
Can we go ahead and call the company and get the process started?
That would be okay, but yeah.
Start the survey process.
Yeah, I'll call George this morning.
Yeah.
Any more questions, Jeremy?
Thank you all. Just
Thanks,
other
Jeremy.
questions, just give me a call. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
See you later, Jeff.
Well, we're all becoming familiar with the ed specs. I thought we'd at least have a little discussion about what is early learning program and why is it different and how it separates itself from a regular elementary school. Dr. Lemon?
The early learning program is a preschool program. It's essentially 3 and 4 years, 4-year-olds, and from there kids move into kindergarten. The program itself is controlled by state statute in that we're required to work with child find identified kids who have serious learning problems or handicapping conditions. We are required to provide a program for those youngsters. And simultaneously or concurrently, we're required to have an equal number of typical kids in the program. So it'd be 50% atypical and 50% typical. The program has been in effect for a very, very long time. I'm not sure when it started, but it had to be in the 1990s, early 1990s at the latest. Within the ed specs, we're requesting 10 classrooms. Classrooms must be 1,000 square feet. Each classroom requires a bathroom because of the age of these youngsters and some of the toileting issues, both for the atypical kids, the toileting issues, and normal toileting issues for the typical kids. The ed specs require a large meeting room, in addition to a similar meeting room for those in K through 5. The reason for a separate one is because there's too much overlap of activities. We use the large room for student drop-off and pickup. We hold large student events there for those kids in the ELP program. We have meetings with parents and presentations in the large room. And because of the fact that the large room is also used in the main building, separate from the ELP, I mean, it's all in one building, but, you know, for the K through 5, we must have 2 separate buildings. We've included in these ed specs, we've modified them since our last board meeting to have 300 square feet for psychologist use. Initially, when the ed specs were developed, there was one space for a psychologist, 150 square feet. But since the board approved the addition of a second psychologist to each of to that school, as to all of our other elementary schools, we require double the space of 300 square. Inherent in the ed specs are coverage for all of our programs that we provide at the elementary school. Obviously, you know, we've talked about the ELP, and again, it has to be on the first floor. We have, within that context, we also have the director of that program, needs a small 150 square foot space. We need, when I said the large room, that's a common room. That would be about 1,700 square feet in order to accommodate all of the kids in the program and the various programs we have.
That's the large meeting room?
That's the large room.
1,700 square feet?
Okay. We also have speech and language services required for that program, so we'll need a small space for a speech and language specialist. We need a room for a DBA, a district behavior analysis. Some of the kids in that program have some really serious behavioral issues, and it's important that once those students are identified for problems with social, emotional, and behavioral functioning, they need consultation support from a district behavior analyst. I mean, the teachers need that, and clinicians and parents need to work with behavioral analysis to determine how best to work with those kids. As I mentioned, for the early learning program has its own psychologist. We need 150-foot room for that. We need space for occupational therapy, and sensory room. That would be, you know, OT would be gross motor skills and fine motor skills. And that's a 1,500 square foot, which gets divided into, which would need a divider so different individuals can work simultaneously with different kids. We need a playground. It's got to be accessible in terms of meeting all the requirements for handicap involvement. That would be, no doubt, specialized. In addition to regular playground equipment, some specialized equipment for the severely handicapped kids to be able to make use of it.
That would be separate from the regular other.
No, it can be together. We would want it together because, you know, you want all the kids to feel like they belong as one.
Okay.
But nonetheless, within that framework, there would be
specialized
some modified equipment.
So that's the only sort of program space thus far that does overlap with the elementary school?
No, it would have its own playground. He meant that.
Yeah, but the playground is really, the other school functions all of the entire.
There would be another playground for the K through 5.
No.
Yeah, you get playgrounds when you go look at them, they're sorted by age and then number of people. So a common for an ELP would be a playground targeted for 2 to 5-year-olds. And then you make modifications as needed for the population of kids that would have special needs.
So
And I
Can I
think you
ask about
see.
the occupancy of the playground? This says up to 30 students per recess session. So that would be a scheduling thing, so you would never have more than certain classrooms out there at the same time?
Yeah, the principal and staff would be responsible for scheduling use of the playground, as with the use of the common room and the speech and language rooms. That's all an internal administrative matter. We would take care of
Was
that.
30 designed as an idea as far as like management of number of kids on the playground at a time?
You'll notice in the ed specs that we have a lot of larger spaces in ELP, because in virtually every situation, we have a paraprofessional or 2 teachers working with a group of kids, because the nature of their problems are such that we require virtually paraprofessional with every group, some for one-on-one and some for the group as a whole. So, this is a population that requires a lot of services.
Question, I would assume, maybe I shouldn't, that this playground for the kids who are ages 2 to 5 should have appropriate adjacency to the area of the building where the ELP program will be taking place, correct?
You're absolutely correct. And when we say it's, that it has to be accessible, part of that definition is close to the building.
Dr. Landon, could you talk a little bit about the forward-looking nature of the capacity that you've designed into this? Just looking at the growth in the number of ELP students, and I think some paperwork I'd seen before that there was kind of a maximum number anticipated in the 90 range. I really worry about putting all the money into this and seeing 3 years from now we've got 2-3x the number of kids that are now requiring these kinds of services. How have you thought about that sort of future state?
Well, first of all, I think a lot of what we've seen lately among younger kids in special services is the increase of kids identified with autistic tendencies. That's more recent. Over the last 10 years, autism has become a major factor. In the past, that was not something that we really looked at, particularly in designing programs for handicapped or special ed kids. And personally, I don't see any reduction. If anything, over the long term, it will be more and more kids identified with autistic issues. And additionally, I know we have the McBroom studies, the Malone and McBroom studies, but as I look at this part of Fairfield County, I think we're going to see growth in the elementary levels, only because there is only so many communities where people are leaving the city or can afford to live here. There are only so many communities where people will select. And I can tell you, off the top of my head, it's going to be New Canaan, Darien, Westport, Wilton, Weston. But those are the communities that are going to continue to see growth, especially among those who can afford to bring their kids to a suburban community with low taxes and high-performing school districts.
Are we building enough capacity?
If I could. We did increase the number of early learning programs in the ed specs to 10, where we currently are for 8. As well as we look forward, the number of kindergarten classrooms are also going to be mirroring at the ELP classrooms. So the 1,000 square feet, the additional 60 square feet for the bathroom space is also going to be in the kindergarten too, thinking that those two could be interchangeable. So if ELP actually expands a little bit more, they could always take a kindergarten classroom space depending on the kindergarten, or if ELP actually swings, we could also take from kindergartens and vice versa.
So the planned ELP capacity that you're putting in there, is that just enough to cover the existing ELP student base, or is it some percentage north of that? Or
more.
Like how much more?
2 more.
We were looking at 2 additional classrooms and projecting, I believe, 110-ish.
10 classrooms.
10 classrooms.
So, 10 ELP.
So how many ELP students do you have today? And what would be the maximum ELP capacity under the new design?
I believe it's 90 today. I believe it's 110 as we go
So
forward.
each classroom can hold 10 students?
10 to, what did they say, 10 to 15?
So you're designing the kindergarten classrooms bigger than they need to be so that they could be repurposed in the future. I think that's a
I think the mandate is 1,000 square feet.
It is for
on a
kindergarten.
class, so they built it.
We're adding the bathroom.
The bathroom in the
Right,
classroom.
right,
So they
right.
both.
That's right.
I think that's fine, but just, we have dealt many times with capacity problems at Tokenie, capacity problems at Darien High School. These are brand-new buildings. And we had a chance to think this, and so when I hear things like, yes, there's capacity flexibility, but we've got 90 kids in there now, astronomical growth, autism issues, as Dr. Landon brought up, and we're planning a setup that's got capacity for 110 kids. That does not feel right to me, and I'm worried that 2 years after this building is built, we got 150 of these kids, and there's no way to build, to do add-on capacity for kids like this, given their needs, in an easy way. And so I think, and I would urge, I'm not saying to go crazy with this, but I would urge everybody to just take a step back and make sure that we've been thoughtful about capacity requirements.
You know, what would we do if, okay, so we've got 150, so yes, we can convert a couple kindergartens rooms to being ELP rooms. What do you do with the kindergartners?
But can I suggest
We need a
that
bigger vote.
when you employ an architect, I think no matter what you build, you should have the architect build in a capacity to expand if necessary. I've done that with a couple of projects. For example, at Staples High School, the original design allowed for a significant expansion of the high school without, which would really be brick and mortar, because all the electrical capability, the plumbing and all is all set at one end of the building, so that it could be added onto it and just connected up to whatever else we have, the heating, plumbing, the rest of the system.
Anyway, we've spent a ton of money on cafeteria expansions. We've got capacity problems at all these brand new schools. I am telling you right now, we should make it a mission of this committee that we are not going to have that with this building. I mean, period, full stop. And whether it's adding the capacity now in anticipation of some of this, which I don't think is unreasonable, or making sure that the design is specifically set such that future expansion is easy, we should not accept anything less. I'm telling you, especially for this community, I'm telling you, it is a mistake.
I do think it's important to notice too, especially in ELP, that if a student presents as an identified need, that the ELP program has to take them. And then for each of those students, we also have to have their counterpart of a typical child. So for any new student that comes in, we're really looking at 2.
2 for 1.
Right.
Correct.
So I think that's important to think about as enrollment grows, that it's really going to double with each student.
So you're really underscoring, excuse me, Mike, 1 second. So the fact that you've planned in an additional 20 students
Yeah, that's where I
is really just 10 ELP students.
So what we're planning for is 10 to 15 students. So 10 classrooms would be anywhere from, would accommodate anywhere from 100 to 150 students.
And that's,
Okay.
so that's 75 required and 75 matches, right?
Typical.
Is there a requirement, a state requirement for when the students go to school in the ELP program? For instance, is it 9 to 12, is it 12 to 3? Not alluding to split sessions, but is there a requirement for the duration that they're in the program?
Our sessions are, it's 8:30 to 1:30 for the atypical kids and 9:30 to 1:30 for typical, because of the extra services that we need to provide to the atypical.
And that's required, that's a state.
I mean, these kids have some real needs that we have.
I think he's asking though that the hours are required.
So it's not.
You have to provide 4 hours of service.
Yes, correct.
And that's, to make sure we have the language correct, does the school district consider both 8:30 to 1:30 and 9:30 to 1:30 an extended day? Is that the correct language around that? Would you refer to
Usually,
that?
we refer to extended day as outside the regular school day. It could be like ESL, would be summer programs. And for example, on Fridays, we have atypical kids with particularly demanding needs. They're the only ones who come in on Friday. So that's extended, if you will.
I also think it's worth noting that like the 9:30 start time and the 8:30 is also done to stagger the arrival times, because none of these buildings were built with the idea that there would be an ELP and an elementary school going, so that helps with busing and traffic currently.
Right, but the ELP student itself is required to be there 44 hours.
It would be actually 5 hours, right? 8:30 to 1:30 would be the
Oh, that's-
atypical ELP.
So they don't need the partner 50%.
Only from 9:30 till 9:30. Right.
I'm sorry.
You know what, John, I think for the capacity issue, I think the site's going to end up constraining it in the sense that between setbacks, between parking coverage, between this and the other, we're probably going to max out by the specifications, and then we're going to find that even you'll probably be limited to the because I agree with you that the cheapest time to build that excess capacity is during this project, but we'll probably bump up against other constraints.
But I agree with that.
You know what I mean?
I think what we should do is just say whatever that maximum
Yeah,
number is,
we-
go
we-
max
we-
it
we
out.
go for it.
As much as you can possibly put in there.
To the extent that we can afford.
And also look for the flexibility within the spaces in the building.
Right.
Which it sounds like you've already accommodated for that with the kindergartens.
Right.
Well, I have one question. It's a tough question, but did I hear one restroom per class?
I'm sorry?
One restroom per class?
For the
elementary
Yes,
class?
the one bathroom.
Is there any way to do Jack and Jill's there? Because those are pretty expensive. You know, you're going to do 10 of them. Could you do where you, if in the design layout, where they're kind of in between classrooms and shared, or is that impractical?
It's impractical.
It's impractical.
Yeah, it's impractical.
Okay.
Especially at that age group and with some of the problems.
Would be
we
a
have.
problem, yeah.
By the way, when we're talking about accessibility, we're going to need an elevator going from first floor to second floor for anybody who's unable to use the steps. So you have to, those are in, that's in the ed specs, but you have to be aware we're going to have an elevator in that building.
Is Royal School the only school with an elevator, or does Holmes?
No, Oxbridge is the only school without.
The only school without?
Without,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, and moving along, are there other matters you want to discuss today on the project? I will say that we all saw the information that you forwarded to me and I forwarded to you concerning the governor's statement about cutting back on bonding, and of course, most bonding is financing school construction. What that means, we don't know yet. It certainly doesn't mean we're going to get more money than less, but whether we get any or not, rather than trying to figure that out now, let's see how it plays out with the budget and all the other stuff that's going on up there, and it may change our approach to asking for the state funds or not.
It's not a fences down moment.
No.
Well, you don't forget Amazon in the state, have no problem.
Yeah, they're not coming to my state, you can have
UPS
Just, in regards to that, the funding, I printed out what the funding rates are for the state of Connecticut. The lowest funded district is Greenwich, we're the second lowest.
Yeah.
And we're at 20.36%. Third lowest is New Canaan, and then I think it doesn't really matter. But you go all the way up to some districts, there's quite a few districts that are in the high 60s to the high 70% state grant funded. So depending on how they cut, if they just cut 20% off of everybody, we now have no funding. If they cut if they just cut 8% of what everybody gets, you might get some funding. But it looks, based on the number I saw, it's something that we're going to have to watch, because it seems like they're trying to keep the grant funding for the state buildings and for the really high-need districts. Like the colleges, dormitories, and the schools that CREC runs. And the regional, that was their other thing they said, that where there's regional schools, they want to keep that funding. So it all pointed to that a lot of the regular districts that get between 20 and 35% are in trouble.
That's for special projects or for?
No, it's for
ongoing
construction.
operations?
School
construction.
School construction.
The only promise that the schools that were in process right now would continue to be supported, but any new construction like this
Correct.
might be at risk.
Right.
Do we have any, in the preliminary schematic that was created and approved to get us to this point, I know that there was ballpark beliefs on how much this would cost. Did we have a view of how much of that we thought would be funded by the state?
Well, it's 20% of
Approved.
of
hard cost?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think of the words, is approved costs, some costs that.
Some costs aren't allowed. They're not going to give you money for certain things, like
So, if we build
demolition.
Yeah,
Okay.
or if we build a cafeteria that's bigger than they think is appropriate for the number of students, they're going to exclude that. So it's 20% of includable costs.
Allowable, that's the
Right.
word, allowable.
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 So it's, I think our experience in the past has been like, we end up around 14 or 15 of our total costs.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And that's, every town gets that rate?
No, this is the.
Oh, got it.
If
So
you're
it's
in-
off that. That's
yeah.
off
So
that.
Bridgeport might get 75,
Yeah.
If you go, the,
Bridgeport gets 78.93.
So we were thinking, if something just to use raw numbers, is $50 million. We were thinking that we would probably, if the past was any indicator, it would be 15% of that,
Yeah.
roughly,
something like that.
roughly.
That's correct.
But
Okay.
if you go
So
into.
the- So the swing factor could be, if that would be $7.5 million, that could be zero
That could
to
be
7.5.
Correct.
Okay, it's just to get to the order of magnitude.
So I would also, if we know at a certain point that we're not getting state funding, then you ought to take a look at the ed specs and think if there were things that you didn't really want to do, but you were required to do in order to be eligible for state funding,
Right,
and rethink those things.
right.
If they're, especially if they're cost items.
The website that Tara sent around, I sent out to everybody, which has all the information on the state funding. Some very interesting stuff in there. There's an awful lot in there, but I saw the rates of, they have all the prior projects over the years that have been approved and what the percentage are given to each town. It was clear that Greenwich was getting the least. Danbury and Bridgeport got the big bucks.
Well, with all due respect, can I respond to that last remark? And that is that if any changes are made to this ed specs for any reasons, it has to go back to the Board of Education for approval. It can't be done without them.
Absolutely, I was not suggesting that you not do that. I was actually thinking more that the Board of Ed would be the ones to reconsider if there was something that they didn't want to do, but felt they had to because of state grant money.
Are the specs obvious, right, in other words, are
They
those?
don't know.
They're tied to the state requirements, and they're pretty black and white as to what's.
But you know which ones you put in there to try to get the grant, and it would be easy to identify those, potentially take them out if it looks like we're not getting the grant. Okay.
Well, they might want to keep them in because they want them.
Well, yeah, but
Right.
to the extent that you
Yeah,
didn't need
give us any
them,
money.
well, to the extent that you did not need them.
Well, there's things like minimum classroom size to hit a grant, but those minimum classroom sizes are also the best practice. So that's what you'd want,
It might be things like roof pitch,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
guess
they,
it could work the other way too, if we find ourselves in a position where we're unlikely to get a state grant and there's any flexibility to add things in that would better accommodate the students that we know wouldn't have gotten any kind of reimbursement. It shouldn't always be looked at as detracting from the program, but maybe additive to the program as well.
I promised our commuters that we get them out of here on time and get trained. So can we talk about when our next meeting should be? Is 2 weeks too early? We'll have a site map hopefully by that time,
Friday, March 1st?
1st of March. Is that good for people?
Are we keeping the morning times, or are we entertaining evening meetings?
well, right now, we're going to do the morning meetings for a while to make sure that our commuters can attend. We'll be going back to some afternoon meetings as well.
Can I just ask what, before you set the date, what do you want to try and make sure you've accomplished to bring to the table by that next meeting? And will 2 weeks give you enough time to do it?
Well, that's why I turned to this site, because we want to get the new site map, or updated site map. We want to have Diane be ready to go out with RFPs to the architect. And will 2 weeks to give you enough time to have both those done?
I'm going to need to see the RFP.
Oh, no, I know.
Did you get a copy, Kate?
No.
Oh,
So
Can you send it to me electronically?
sure.
Thanks.
We should ask everyone to review the RFP and send any comments in as soon as
Exactly.
possible.
Now, if people want, I have that on Google Docs. If anybody wants it that way, that they could just put their additions right in and then send it to Kate. If that make it easier for everybody, I'll send it out to everybody.
It'd be great to have an electronic version.
Great. But it's 2 weeks enough time to take those 2 steps at least?
So the RFP would be prepared and approved on in 2 weeks, or we'd actually have it out in 2 weeks?
We're not going to have it out in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Say the next meeting, we would approve it.
Approve it.
So reviews, edited and approval,
Is that,
I would think that's reasonable.
you want more time? Kate, you know how these things work.
I think that's fine.
Enough time?
Yeah.
Okay. Then let's set it for Friday, March 1st, same time this time.
7:30.
7:30.
So you know, I've got flexibility on
Thanks, John.
work from home days and stuff, so.
Okay.
You don't have to necessarily assume I'm commuting,
Great.
just in case that some folks don't want to meet at something, just so you know.
Okay.
But that's what you're putting down, right, 7:30 on Friday?
7:30 Friday, March 1st, our next meeting here.
Okay.
And if it turns out that in that case that I'm the only commuter, I mean, we do not have to meet at 7:30, I will come when I can, but I don't want to contaminate everyone else's schedule.
You not want to miss your words of wisdom.
You're not missing much.
There being no further business,
Did the building
meeting adjourned.
survey,
We're adjourned.
this was